January 12, 1888. The Great Plains, Dakota Territory, Nebraska, Minnesota, and west into Montana Territory. That morning was the first easy morning anybody had seen in a week. In Omaha, the thermometer read 6 degrees below zero at 7 on the morning of the 11th. At 7 the next morning it read 28 above, 34 degrees of relief in a single day. Children walked to school with their coats hanging open, and some of them did not carry a coat at all. But the cold that came for them that afternoon is not what did most of the killing, and neither was the wind. By the middle of the afternoon, the front came through. The temperature dropped from above, freezing down to 20 below within hours. In some places it went to 40 below. The lowest reading anybody wrote down that night came out of Montana Territory at Poplar River, close to 57 degrees below zero. The snow that came with it was ground fine and driven flat, and it filled the air so completely that people could not find buildings they had put up with their own hands. In Plainview, Nebraska, a teacher named Lois Royce had 3 children still in her schoolhouse and a stove that had burned the last of its fuel by 3 in the afternoon. Her boarding house stood 82 yards away. A man could throw a rock that far without much of an arm on him. She took the 3 children and started for it. They never found it. 2 boys, both of them 9 years old, and a girl of 6, died on the open ground between a schoolhouse and a building they could not see. Royce lived through the night. She lost both her feet. The number usually given for the dead in that one storm is 235. Some sources put it plenty higher. There is no clean count and never will be, because the counting was done county by men who had their own dead to bury. Everybody called it the blizzard, and the blizzard has taken the blame ever since. But look at who died and who did not. The teachers who kept their children inside the schoolhouse, cold as those buildings got, generally brought every one of them out alive. The disasters came when somebody looked at the weather and made a decision to cross open ground. The thermometer did not do the killing. It was done to people who were moving, dressed for a morning that no longer existed, at the exact moment the day turned over on them. And that same arithmetic ran through the logging camps of Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota and the Northern Rockies every winter for 50 years, 1 and 2 men at a time. Never enough at once to make a newspaper, so it never got counted. Now let me put the bear where it belongs, since I put it in the title. Compilations of the records going back into the 1700s put the total number of people killed by bears in North America in the low hundreds. Grizzly and black bear together. Across the whole continent, across 2 centuries and more. Set that against the cold. The federal death records for 1999 through 2011 show close to 17,000 Americans dead from exposure to natural cold. About 1,300 a year in a country full of furnaces and paved roads. So the cold kills as many Americans in roughly 2 months of an ordinary winter as every bear on this continent has managed in 240 years. And the men in the camps saw a version of that every winter and still went out and did the thing that killed them, because they had been handed a rule that felt true. My grandfather ran trap lines on the Clark Fork before the roads came into this valley. The men who taught him about cold did not read it in a book. They buried friends over it. And the first thing they told him was that the cold does not take the man who is frightened of it. It takes the man who is comfortable. I am Orson Rusk. Let's go through it properly. The myth is still in circulation, and most of the people carrying it do not know they are carrying it. It comes in 4 common shapes. The first and the oldest is the bottle. A drink warms a man up. A nip before you go out into it. Whiskey against the cold. Everybody has heard it. A great many believe it. And there is a picture in your head right now of a dog in the snow with a little cask on its collar. We will get to that dog. The second is work.
A working man is a safe man because work makes heat. Swing an axe and you will not freeze. The third is the thermometer. Cold kills at cold temperatures. The danger sits down at 20 below, and a gray, wet day at 38 degrees is nothing worse than miserable. And the fourth is the hat, on the grounds that the heat goes out through your head, so cover your head and you have dealt with the main problem. Every one of those is wrong, not old-fashioned and not roughly right. Wrong in the direction that gets people killed, and I am going to show you the mechanism behind each one. There are 7 pieces to this. Anybody who has spent real time outdoors gets the first 2 or 3 about right, more by instinct than knowledge. The 4th and 5th are where the old advice starts working against you. But the 7th dropped out of the trade somewhere in the last 100 years. It is the one the old woods bosses drilled into green hands on the first morning, and it is the difference between a man who comes back from the timber and a man who is found the next day beside the tote road with his shirt open. We will get to all 7. Stay with me, and one small thing before we start. If this is the sort of thing you came here for, put a subscribe on it. Not for my sake. I am going to keep digging these up either way. But the next one runs through the same country, and you will want it. Now. The first piece. What the cold is actually doing to you. Your body runs at about 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit. The air around you in a logging camp in January might be 20. That gap is a physics problem long before it is a comfort problem, and physics does not stop working because you have a good coat on. Heat leaves you by 4 roots, and the myths come from watching one and ignoring the other 3. Conduction is direct contact, sitting on a cold log, kneeling in wet snow, gripping an iron tool barehanded. Convection is moving air and moving water carrying heat off your skin. This is the wind. A still day at 10 degrees is survivable in decent clothing. The same 10 degrees with a steady wind across an open cutting strips heat faster than your coat can hold it. Radiation is your body throwing heat into the space around it the way a stove does, whether anything touches you or not. And evaporation is moisture leaving your skin and your clothing, carrying heat out with it. Hold on to that 4th one. That is the whole story of this video. Water pulls heat out of a body roughly 25 times faster than air does. 25 times. That is the difference between a problem and an emergency, and it is why every serious account of cold weather death comes back to the same word. Wet rather than cold. Wet. The second piece follows straight out of that, and it catches out the confident. The temperature is not the danger. Hypothermia deaths regularly happen between 30 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, above freezing. The public health people who study this describe the ordinary case as exposure to cool weather under 50 degrees, combined with wind, wet or inadequate clothing, fatigue, and a man who has not eaten enough. Read that list again and tell me what it describes. It describes a workday. It describes every man who spent a mild, damp February afternoon in the timber and walked back to camp tired and hungry and soaked through. Down at 20 below, a man is frightened, and fear is useful.
He wears everything he owns. He keeps the fire close. He does not wander. The bitter days in a logging camp were rarely the killing days. The killing days were 38 degrees and drizzle. Because at 38 degrees with a wet snow coming down, nobody is frightened. Nobody puts on the good coat. Nobody hurries. And the man is soaked to the skin by 10 in the morning and thinks nothing of it, because it is not cold out. Conditions that feel dangerous get respect, and respect keeps men alive. Conditions that feel merely unpleasant get none, and that is where the bodies come from. Which brings me to the third piece, and this is where the logger gets into real trouble, because of what the job was. Logging was done in winter precisely because you needed frozen ground and packed snow to move the timber. Sleighs ran on iced roads. Rivers had to be frozen for the landings. The whole industry crowded its heaviest labor into the coldest months on purpose. By the census of 1890, better than 23,000 men were working in Wisconsin's logging industry alone, spread across something like 450 camps every winter. Michigan and Minnesota had their own, and the Northern Rockies filled up later with the same trade and the work. 14-hour days, 2 men on a crosscut saw, swamping out brush, loading sleighs, wading in snow to the waist to get around the butt of a tree. Heavy labor in cold air, in heavy wool clothing. The man is producing heat at 4 or 5 times his resting rate, and his body has one main way to shed the surplus. He sweats. Sweat is a summer word, so nobody thinks of it as a winter problem. But the body does not care about the season. It cares about core temperature. And if you are making more heat than you are shedding, you sweat at 20 degrees just the same as at 90. A man working hard can produce a liter of sweat in an hour. Under real load, more. And here is the part that ought to stop you cold. Evaporating 1 liter of sweat takes somewhere around 580 calories of heat out of the body. That is the calorie you count in food. 580 of them gone out of 1 hour's sweat, purely to turn that water into vapor. In a hayfield in August, that is the system working as designed. In the timber in January, that is a hole in the bottom of the bucket. And it does not stop when you stop. The sweat is already in your clothing, and it will evaporate on its own schedule, and every gram that leaves takes its heat out of the nearest warm object. You are the nearest warm object, which takes us to the 4th piece. What water does to cloth? Clothing does not warm you. It has no heat of its own. What a wool coat does is hold a layer of still air against your skin, and still air is a poor conductor of heat, so the air does the insulating, and the wool only holds it in place. Every warm garment ever made, from a caribou skin parka to a modern down bag, is a device for trapping air. Now put water into it. Water displaces the air. It fills the spaces that were doing the work, and it carries heat away about 25 times faster than air does. So, a wet garment is not a slightly worse garment. Its working principle has been removed and replaced with the opposite. The old woods clothing was wool, and the reason is worth understanding properly rather than as a slogan. Wool crimps. The fibers are springy and do not lie down flat when soaked, so a wet wool garment still holds some structure and some trapped air. It keeps a meaningful share of its value wet. Not all of it, but a share. Cotton does the opposite, friend. Cotton fiber soaks up water, swells, and collapses. The air spaces close entirely. A wet cotton shirt has essentially no insulating value, and worse, it holds the water against you and keeps handing it back for hours. There is a saying in the mountains that cotton kills, and it is one of the few of that kind that is straightforwardly true. But here is what the slogan misses. A wet wool shirt is better than a wet cotton shirt. A wet wool shirt is far worse than a dry wool shirt. The old hands were saved by wool, and by keeping it out of the wet, friend, rather than by wool alone. Take away the second half, and the first will not carry you. The 5th piece is the reason men died on a road they had walked 200 times. They did not die at work. At work, the man is a furnace. He is producing heat faster than the cold can take it away. He has stripped to a shirt and hung his coat on a stump because he was overheating, and that shirt is wet through with sweat, and he has not given it a moment's thought. Then the day ends, and inside of 10 minutes, everything reverses. Heat production falls off a cliff. He is no longer sawing, he is walking, or sitting on a sleigh, or standing about waiting for the crew. But the loss does not drop with it. The loss goes up, because now he is out of the shelter of the timber and into the wind on the tote road, and that wet shirt is free to evaporate into cold air with no work being done to replace what it takes. He is carrying a liter of cold water against his skin at the exact moment his furnace shuts down. That is the crossing point. Not the axe work and not the blizzard, the walk home. And you can measure it because a modern army ran the experiment by accident, on a scale nobody would ever design on purpose. In the winter of 1944 into 45, in the European theater, the United States Army recorded on the order of 70,000 cold injury casualties, frostbite, and what they called trench foot. About 90% of them were front-line riflemen. The Army's own medical history does not blame the temperature. Northwest Europe that winter was cold and wet, but it was not Siberia. The history blames wet feet and men who could not get dry, and the fact that soldiers had never been taught to avoid cold injury. They got wet and stayed wet, and the cold did the rest. 70,000 men taken out of the line. From damp. Now hold that thought, because the sixth piece is the one that turns a wet, tired man into a dead one. The bottle. The myth here is not a stupid myth. It exists because the feeling is real. Alcohol relaxes the small blood vessels near the surface of the skin. They open. Warm blood from the core runs out to the surface, and the surface is where your temperature sensors live. Your face flushes. Your hands and ears come alive. You feel warmth arrive genuinely in the places where you had stopped feeling anything. So the sensation is not imaginary. Something warm really did arrive at your skin. The trouble is what that warmth is doing there. Skin is the surface of the radiator. Skin is where you lose heat. Under ordinary cold, your body clamps those vessels shut on purpose, pulls the blood back into the trunk, and lets your fingers and your face go cold because it is protecting the core where your heart and your organs live. That pinched feeling in your hands is the body defending itself. A drink undoes that defense. It opens the radiator and pushes your core heat out to a surface sitting in 20-degree air. The warm feeling is the sensation of your reserves leaving. Now, the state of the science here is more interesting than the simple version, and I would rather give it to you straight. Researchers do not entirely agree on which part does the most damage. The opening of those surface vessels is real and well documented, but there is a solid line of work arguing the bigger effect sits somewhere else. Alcohol appears to interfere with shivering. Shivering is your emergency heat generator. It can lift heat production several times over resting, and for a man in trouble it is often the only thing standing between him and a real fall in core temperature. Studies have found that even moderate amounts of alcohol cut down how hard a person shivers, and some of that appears to work through blood sugar rather than through the blood vessels at all. So the mechanism is argued about. The outcome is not. Whichever way it works, a man with a drink in him cools faster and defends himself worse. And then the third effect, which needs no laboratory at all. He stops feeling cold, so he stops making good decisions. He takes the shortcut across the frozen slough instead of the long way round. He sits down for a minute because his legs are heavy. He decides he is fine. Now put a number on it. A Swedish study that went through fatal accidental hypothermia cases found that roughly 2 out of every 3 of the dead had alcohol in them. 2 out of 3. And the federal health agencies list alcohol among the main contributing factors in accidental hypothermia death, right alongside age and homelessness. That is this winter, in this country, every year, rather than a frontier curiosity. Now let me tell you where the picture in your head came from. You know the image. The big dog in the snowdrift, the little wooden cask under its chin, the traveler half buried and reaching for it. That dog has been on tins and biscuit boxes and cartoons for 200 years. The cask was invented by a teenage boy with a paintbrush. In 1820, a young English painter named Edwin Landseer produced a canvas called Alpine Mastiffs, Reanimating a Distressed Traveler.
2 big dogs in the snow, a man down, 1 dog licking his hand. And around that dog's neck, Landseer painted a small barrel of brandy because he thought it made a better picture. He was not in the Alps. He painted it in England, in a studio, out of his head. The monks of the hospice, the men who actually ran those dogs through those passes for centuries, have said plainly that their dogs never carried brandy. 1 boy, 1 canvas, 1 decorative flourish. 200 years later, the whole English-speaking world knows for a fact that the rescue dog brings you a drink. That is how a myth gets made. Not by a liar, by a picture that was too good to check. And here is the ugly part. What that painting taught the world is close to the opposite of what a cold man needs, and people acted on it. For well over a century, the standard kindness offered to a man pulled out of the snow was the one thing that made his position worse. Let me say one thing here, and then I will leave it alone. Everything I have gathered up over the years, the cold, the fire, the water, the shelter, the food, what the old hands actually did, and what it cost the ones who got it wrong. It is all written down in one book over at orsonrusk.com. 90 methods. Plain, what each one does and what it does not do. It is there if you want it, that is all. Back to the woods. Now, somebody did see through the brandy business early, and I will give him his due. A French army surgeon named Mauriceau Beaupré came out of Napoleon's retreat from Moscow in 1812, which stands as one of the great mass cold casualties in recorded history, and he wrote a treatise on the effects of cold. Published in French in 1817, and still one of the better first-hand descriptions of men dying of cold that anybody has produced. And he noticed something in the wreckage of that retreat. The soldiers who got drunk died. He got the reason partly wrong. He thought it was because a drunk man lies down in the snow and does not get up, which is true as far as it goes. The vasodilation piece was not understood until the late 1800s, 60-odd years later. But he saw the pattern in 1812 and wrote it down in 1817. 3 years after that, a boy in a London studio painted a dog with a barrel of brandy on its collar, and the boy won. Now for the logging camps, because there is a detail here that explains the shape of the deaths. The camps were dry. Most lumber companies forbade liquor in camp outright, partly because drunk men and crosscut saws and falling timber do not mix, and partly because a camp full of drink does not turn out logs. A bottle got smuggled in now and again, but the camp was sober for months at a stretch. So the drinking happened on the trip out, payday, or the end of the season, or a Saturday when a town was close enough to walk to. Men who had been working 70 hours a week in the cold walked into town, spent the evening in a warm room with a stove and a bottle, and then walked back. Look at what that man is carrying on the road home. His layers are already damp from the week. He has been sitting in a hot room, so he sweated some more and his shirt never dried. He has plenty of drink in him, so his surface vessels are wide open and his shivering is blunted. He is warm from the stove, so he sets off with his coat open and his hat in his pocket, because for the first 100 yards he is too warm. He is not frightened because it is not a cold night, and he has 4 miles of open road in front of him. That man is not being reckless by the standards of his own day. He worked hard, so he made heat. He had a drink, so he was warm. It was not bitter out, so there was no danger. He had his hat. 4 rules, and all 4 of them wrong, and the road did not care. Which brings me to the 7th piece, the one that got dropped. The old woods bosses gave green hands a rule on the first morning. It sounded backwards, and every young man had to learn it the hard way at least once. You start cold, not comfortable, but cold. You strip a layer before you begin working, not after, and you stand there genuinely uncomfortable for 5 or 10 minutes, because inside a quarter of an hour the work will have made up the difference. Set out warm, and you are soaked by mid-morning. Then the second half of the rule, which is the half that actually saves you, You put that layer back on the moment the work stops, not when you start to feel cold. Before. Because by the time you feel cold, the wet already has a head start on you, and everything after that is you trying to make up a deficit while sitting on a sleigh in the wind. That is the seventh piece. Vent before you sweat, and dress before you cool. It sounds like the sort of advice a man skips past, and it is the discipline that separates the ones who worked 40 winters in the timber from the ones who did not come back from one. It survives in two places, which tells you it is more than old woods talk. The first is the Army. The United States Army teaches soldiers a word for judging cold weather clothing, and the word is cold, spelled out as 4 rules. Keep it clean, avoid overheating, wear it loose and in layers, and keep it dry. Avoid overheating. Second letter of a 4-letter rule taught to men whose lives depend on it. The Army did not put that there for comfort. They put it there because they lost something near 70,000 men to cold injury in a single winter, and wrote down why. The second is older and better. A traditional caribou skin parka is not fitted tight. It hangs loose at the bottom on purpose, so a man doing hard work can dump heat and moist air out the bottom before it soaks into the fur. 2 layers, fur turned in on the inner and out on the outer, air moving through, so sweat does not settle in one place and freeze there and ruin the insulation. They built the sweat rule into the coat itself over thousands of years, and everybody who got it wrong stopped contributing to the design. Before I close it out, 4 habits that people trusted then and still trust now, and what each one is actually worth. The hat. I said I would come back to it. You have heard that you lose 40 or 45% of your body heat through your head. That figure sat in print in old military survival manuals and has been repeated by mothers for 70 years. It came out of a flawed experiment in the 1950s. They zipped volunteers into Arctic survival suits, covered from the neck down, and sent them into the cold bareheaded. The head, being the only bare skin on the whole body, gave off the most heat, which it would. That is a discovery about the only uncovered part of anything, neighbor, rather than a discovery about heads. 2 doctors went through it properly and published the correction in the British Medical Journal in 2008. Your head accounts for something like 7 to 10% of your heat loss, which is roughly its share of your skin. It is not special. Wear a hat. It is cheap cover, and there is no argument for going without one. But do not wear a hat and think you have handled the problem, because the problem is in your shirt. The hot drink. A cup of coffee at the end of a cold day is one of the finer things there is, and I will not hear a word against it. What it will not do is meaningfully raise the core temperature of a big, cold man. 1 cup is a small heat against a large body, a comfort, not a correction. Running to warm yourself. It works briefly and it costs you. You make heat, and you also sweat, and you burn fuel you may need later. A man already wet and tired who starts running to get warm is spending capital he does not have. And the light in the window. A cold man will fix on the idea of the fire, or the cabin, or the lamp, and push toward it well past the point where he should have stopped and got out of the wind. The 82 yards in Nebraska was exactly that. There was a building, it was right there, and it was reachable on any other afternoon of the year. One last thing, because it explains something that puzzled people for a long time. Men found dead of cold are sometimes found undressed, coat off, shirt open, boots pulled off and set aside. It turns up often enough that forensic pathologists have a name for it. Paradoxical undressing. In one study of lethal hypothermia cases, it was present in about 1/4 of them. At a certain stage of core cooling, the body's control of those surface vessels fails altogether. Everything the alcohol was doing on purpose now happens on its own. Blood floods to the skin. The man gets a genuine sensation of burning up, and he takes his clothes off. It is the last thing he does that he believes is sensible, and for 100 years it made those deaths look like something else. Men found stripped in the snow got written up as robberies, as assaults, as strange business. They were none of that. They were men whose thermostat failed at the end. It is the same false signal that comes out of a bottle. The bottle only brings it on hours early, while the man is still walking. So let me put the whole of it back together. Those men in the camps were not fools, any more than the people on the plains in 1888 were fools. They were hard, competent men who worked in conditions that would flatten most of us inside a week. They read the sky better than I read it. And they died anyway, in ones and twos, every winter, for 50 years because 4 things everybody knew were false. A drink does not warm you. It opens the radiator, it blunts the shiver, and it takes your judgment at the moment you need it most. Work does not protect you. Work soaks you, and the soaking presents its bill the minute the work stops. The thermometer does not tell you where the danger sits. 38 degrees and drizzle has killed far more men than 20 below, because 20 below gets respect and 38 does not. And the hat is not the answer. It is a small good thing standing in front of a large problem. The bear got the title, friend. The bear got the stories, and the campfire talk, and 200 years of reputation. And the bear, across this whole continent since before there was a United States, has killed a number of people you could seat in a small church. The wet shirt did the rest. A wet shirt, a warm feeling, and 4 miles of road. Cold takes the comfortable neighbor. It always has. The man who is frightened puts his coat back on. So here is the whole of it, friend, and this was never really about cold. It was about the fact that danger does not feel like danger. 20 below gets your respect and puts your coat back on. 38 and drizzle gets nothing from you, and that is why it fills the graves. That is not doom talk, neighbor. Civilization is fine, and your furnace works. The only thing missing is the part of you that treats a wet shirt in October as the emergency it actually is, and that part has not gone anywhere. It is only untrained. So do one thing this Saturday. Go through the coat and shirt you would be wearing if your truck quit on a back road in November and find out what they are made of. If the answer is cotton, friend, you know something about your own closet that you did not know this morning. Your great-grandfather would not have owned a cotton shirt for winter work at any price, friend. Somebody just did not get the chance to hand that down to you. And that is what I was here for tonight. Now tell me down below, was there a rule in your family about sweating in the cold? Somebody who made you take a layer off before the work started, or who would not let you sit down wet? Every region had its own version, and the answer that comes up most is the one I build the next video around. Next time, 15 trapper tricks that still make a modern outfitting catalog look foolish, neighbor, and the one that fewer than a dozen men alive can still do properly. That is the whole of it. No trick to it once you know.